General Kriath walked through the massive doors of the Imperial War Council chamber. His forearms hung at his sides and his reptilian scales caught the light from the crystal ceiling above. He had fought in 200 battles across the galaxy. He had conquered 17 worlds for the Empire, but today his hearts beat faster than they had in any combat. The chamber was enormous. 50 council members sat in a circle around a central platform. Their species came from all corners of the Vraxian Empire. Some had tentacles. Some had wings. Some breathed methane through masks. All of them held power over trillions of lives. High Chancellor Mordrek sat on the highest throne. His body was made of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. When he spoke, his voice echoed like breaking glass. General Kriath, you commanded the annexation fleet that brought the human homeworld into our empire 30 years ago. Is this correct? Yes, High Chancellor. Kriath's voice was steady, but his claws dug into his palms. Then you will provide testimony today regarding Imperial Decree 7743. All member species must contribute military forces to our war against the Confederation of Free Worlds. The humans have requested exemption. They claim they are still recovering from their own planetary wars. Mordrek's laughter sounded like shattering glass. What is your professional opinion on this request? The chamber filled with clicking, buzzing, and chirping sounds. The council members were laughing. Kriath looked across the room and saw Ambassador Chen Wei. She was the human representative to the Empire. She wore a simple gray suit and sat very still in her designated seat. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face showed no emotion, but Kriath could see the fear in her eyes. Humans were small compared to most galactic species. They had only 2 arms and 2 legs. Their skin was soft and easily damaged. They had no natural weapons, no claws or fangs or venom. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only 80 years ago. Most species had been traveling the stars for thousands of years before joining the Empire. The humans are primitive, said Council Member Thexnar, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish. They have crude plasma weapons and basic shield technology. Their ships are slow. Their soldiers are weak. We need every available fighter for the war effort. 5 million human soldiers will help fill our ranks. They should be honored to serve, added another council member. We brought them civilization. We gave them access to galactic trade and technology. Now they must pay their debt. The council chamber filled with sounds of agreement. Kriath stood silently on the central platform. He remembered fire. He remembered screaming. He remembered a human face covered in blood and ash, still firing a weapon even as life left the body. General Kriath, Mordrek said, you have not answered the question. Should we grant the human request for exemption? Every eye in the chamber turned to Kriath. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. In his 2 centuries of military service, Kriath had never disobeyed an order. He had never questioned Imperial policy. He was known across the galaxy as the Iron General, the one who never wavered. Yes, Kriath said. We should grant their request. The chamber exploded with noise. Council members shouted in dozens of languages. Some rose from their seats. Others slammed appendages against their armrests. High Chancellor Mordrex raised one crystalline hand and the chamber fell silent again. Explain yourself, General. The High Chancellor's voice was cold now. You who brought the humans to heal. You who defeated their pathetic resistance. You now say we should allow them to refuse their duty to the Empire? Kriath felt the weight of 200 years pressing on his shoulders. He thought of his many honors and decorations. He thought of his reputation. He thought of the consequences of what he was about to do. But mostly he thought of Geneva. High Chancellor, Council members, I urge you to grant this request because I have fought the humans. I have studied them. I have seen what they become when they go to war. Kriath paused. And I have seen the cost of forcing them to fight. Cost? Mordrex leaned forward. The humans lost their war against us. They surrendered. They had no choice. We suffered some casualties, yes, but nothing significant. Your fleet remained intact. The conquest was completed in under 2 years. With respect, High Chancellor, we did not conquer humanity. They allowed us to stop killing them. There is a difference, the council chamber erupted again. Kriath heard words like coward and traitor, mixed with the alien languages. But he also saw some council members leaning forward with interest. A few had gone very quiet. Ambassador Chen Wei had not moved. But now her eyes were locked on Kriath. He could not read human expressions well, but he thought he saw something like recognition in her face. This is absurd. said Council Member Volthas. A massive creature with 6 legs and armored plating. I have reviewed the military reports from the human annexation. The humans had primitive weapons. They had no orbital defense platforms. Their finest warships were destroyed in the first 3 days of conflict. You commanded a fleet of 500 Imperial vessels against their mere 200 human ships. The military disparity was overwhelming. That is all true, Kriath said. Everything you say is factually correct. And yet I lost 40,000 soldiers conquering one planet. 40,000 trained Imperial warriors dead or permanently disabled. Do you know how many soldiers I lost conquering the Drek's homeworld? 300. The Dreks had better technology than the humans. They had a larger fleet. They had orbital defenses. But I lost only 300 soldiers there and 40,000 on Earth. The chamber had gone quiet again. Kriath had their attention now. I must tell you what happened during the annexation, Kriath continued. I must explain why humanity should remain neutral in our war. Not because they are weak, but because they are dangerous in ways that do not appear in military assessments or technology reports. High Chancellor Mordrex stared at him for a long moment. Then he gestured with one crystalline hand. Very well, General. Tell your tale. Convince us that the humans are somehow special. Convince us that they deserve exemption from Imperial service. But choose your words carefully. Your career and your freedom depend on this testimony. Kriath bowed his head. Thank you, High Chancellor. What I am about to tell you is the truth. All of it is documented in classified military reports. Some of it has never been made public because we did not want other species to learn human tactics. He straightened and looked around the chamber. 30 years ago, I led the Imperial annexation fleet to Earth. I expected an easy conquest. I believed I would be home within 6 months. He paused and met Ambassador Chen Wei's eyes. It took me 2 years, and I have had nightmares every night since. The chamber was completely silent now. Outside the massive windows, the stars of the galactic core burned with ancient light. Inside, General Kriath prepared to tell a story that would change everything. Kriath stood on the central platform of the War Council chamber and began his testimony. His voice was steady, but his memories were not. He had spent 30 years trying to forget what happened on Earth. Now he had to remember every detail. 30 years ago, Imperial scouts detected faster-than-light signatures from a previously uncharted system. The humans had just developed their first FTL drives. They were making short jumps between their planets, testing their new technology. The Empire sent my fleet to make first contact and bring them into Imperial space. Kriath activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. An image of Earth appeared, rotating slowly. It was a blue and green world covered with clouds and oceans. Initial contact seemed promising. The humans were excited to meet other intelligent species. They invited our diplomatic teams to their planet. They showed us their cities, their culture, their technology. We assessed them as primitive but cooperative. Their weapons were crude projectile devices and early plasma technology. They were approximately 500 years behind galactic standard in all areas. Council member Thexnar interrupted. Then why did conquest take 2 years? You should have completed annexation in weeks. I thought so too, Kriath said quietly. The human governments were divided. They had nearly 200 separate nations on their world. Most of them voted to join the Empire peacefully. They saw the benefits of galactic trade and technology, but a coalition of 37 human nations refused. They said they would not submit to Imperial authority. The holographic display changed to show a map of Earth. Red zones marked the resisting nations across several continents. High Command ordered me to make an example of the resistance. I was to occupy one region and demonstrate that defiance would not be tolerated. I chose a territory the humans call Eastern Europe and Central Asia. It was a collection of smaller nations with limited military capability. I landed 50,000 troops and established orbital blockade. I expected the occupation to last 3 months at most. Kriath paused. The memories were coming faster now. He could smell the burning cities again. The humans did not fight like other species. When most civilizations face overwhelming force, they retreat to defend their critical resources. They consolidate their armies. They seek favorable terrain for major battles. The humans did none of this. Instead, they scattered. They broke into small groups of 10 or 20 fighters. They hid among their own civilian populations. They struck at our supply lines, our communications, our isolated outposts. The holographic display showed Imperial casualties mounting over time. The council members watched in silence. In the first month, I lost 300 soldiers. This seemed acceptable. But then I lost another 400 in the second month, and 600 in the third month. The humans were learning faster than we could adapt. They studied our patrol patterns. They identified our weaknesses. They built weapons from salvaged Imperial technology. Ambassador Chen sat perfectly still in her seat, but Kriath saw tears on her face now. She knew this story. All humans knew this story. The humans used tactics I had never encountered in 200 campaigns. They would hide explosives inside the bodies of their own dead. They would send their children forward with messages, and those children carried sensors that mapped our defensive positions. They would contaminate their own water supplies with diseases, knowing our soldiers would drink from those sources. Council member Voltus shifted in his seat. Surely your superior technology gave you an advantage. You had scanners, drones, orbital surveillance. Yes, Kriath said, and the humans found ways around all of it. They built tunnels that our scanners could not penetrate. They used the magnetic fields of their planet to hide their movements. They learned which materials blocked our sensors and wrapped themselves in those materials. One human group managed to hack into our communications network, using nothing but primitive computers and captured equipment. They listened to our orders for 3 weeks before we discovered the breach. The holographic display showed a mountain range. Kriath felt his throat tighten. In the Ural Mountains, a human resistance force numbering approximately 3,000 fighters held off my army for 8 months. 3,000 against 50,000. They had no air support. They had no orbital weapons. They had projectile rifles, improvised explosives, and determination. We eventually defeated them, but we lost 9,000 soldiers doing it. The chamber was completely silent. Even High Chancellor Mordrex had stopped moving. I studied human history during the occupation. I needed to understand why they fought this way. I discovered that humans have been at war with each other for their entire existence as a species. They have developed warfare into a science. They have words for concepts that do not exist in other languages. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, Totalva, scorched earth. They have fought each other so viciously for so long that fighting is part of their cultural identity. Kriath changed the holographic display. Now it showed human history. Thousands of years of warfare scrolled past. They have a saying on Earth. They say that humans have spent only 8% of their recorded history at peace. The remaining 92%. Somewhere on their planet, humans were killing other humans. They invented weapons specifically to kill each other more efficiently. They built walls to keep each other out. They created entire philosophies about the nature of war. Council member Thexnar spoke up. But they lost. You conquered them. How does this make them dangerous to the Empire now? Kriath turned to face the council member directly. Because I have not finished my story. What I have described so far was just the occupation of one region. The truly terrible part came when we moved on the human capital. The holographic display changed again. Now it showed a city. The buildings were tall and beautiful, arranged around a blue lake. This is Geneva. It was the headquarters of the Human United Nations, their global government organization. After 8 months in the mountains, my forces moved to surround the city. We had 400,000 troops by then. High Command had sent reinforcements. We had complete orbital superiority. The humans had no fleet left, no satellites, no orbital defenses. They had approximately 500,000 soldiers defending Geneva and 2 million civilians inside the city. Kriath's voice grew softer. We offered them generous terms. Surrender the city, accept Imperial rule, and no more humans would die. We would provide food, medicine, and reconstruction aid. All they had to do was stop fighting. The human leadership called for a vote. Ambassador Chen made a small sound. It might have been a sob. Even as our artillery bombarded their outer defenses, the humans held a democratic vote. Every soldier and every civilian in Geneva was asked to choose. Surrender and live under Imperial rule or fight to extinction. I monitored their communications. I listened to them debate. Many argued for surrender. Many pointed out that continuing to fight was suicide. And yet, when they counted the votes, 67% chose to fight. The council members shifted uncomfortably. Several were looking at Ambassador Chen now. The siege of Geneva lasted 47 days. The humans turned every building into a fortress. They destroyed their own infrastructure to deny us resources. They used chemical weapons that had been banned on Earth for a century. They detonated nuclear devices inside their own city when we breached their walls. When we finally reached the central government building, there were only 300 human soldiers left alive. Kriath paused and looked at each council member in turn. We lost 40,000 Imperial soldiers taking that one city, 40,000 trained warriors with advanced technology, killed by humans using primitive weapons and absolute determination. And do you know what the last human commander said to me when I accepted his surrender? No one spoke, he said. You won, but you'll never forget the price. And he was right. For 30 years I have remembered. The War Council chamber remained silent as Kriath continued his testimony. Some council members had stopped looking at him. They stared at their displays or at the floor, but they were all listening now. I want to describe the siege of Geneva in detail, Kriath said. Not because I enjoy remembering it, I do not, but because you need to understand what humans become when they decide to fight to the end. The holographic display showed Geneva before the siege. It was a beautiful city with ancient buildings and modern towers. Parks and gardens filled the spaces between structures. The lake sparkled in the sunlight. We began our assault on day one with standard siege tactics. We cut off all supply routes. We jammed their communications. We established a complete orbital blockade. No food, water, or medicine could reach the city. Our projections indicated the humans would exhaust their supplies in 30 days. We could wait them out. Kriath changed the display. Now it showed the first week of the siege. The humans did not wait. On day 2, they launched a coordinated attack on our siege lines from inside the city. 5,000 human soldiers charged our positions armed with nothing but projectile weapons and explosive devices. They knew they could not break through. They knew they would die. But they attacked anyway because they wanted to inflict casualties. They wanted us to know that waiting would cost us soldiers. Council member Voltus leaned forward. How many of those 5,000 survived? 3, Kriath said. 3 out of 5,000. But they killed or wounded 800 of my soldiers before we stopped them. The humans called it a suicide charge. They have a long history of such tactics. When facing certain defeat, some of their warriors throughout history have chosen to die fighting rather than surrender. They believe there is honor in this. The holographic display showed more battles. Kriath pointed to different sections of the siege lines. The humans divided Geneva into defensive sectors. Each sector had a commander and approximately 30,000 fighters. They were not professional soldiers. Many were civilians who had picked up weapons. Teachers, doctors, engineers, office workers. But they had all trained in basic combat because military service was mandatory in many human nations. They knew how to shoot. They knew how to follow orders. And they knew they were going to die. Kriath's voice grew hollow as he remembered. On day 7, we breached the outer wall in the northern sector. My troops poured through the gap, expecting to overrun the human positions. Instead, they found themselves in a trap. The humans had rigged entire city blocks with explosives. When enough of my soldiers entered the sector, they detonated everything. 3,000 Imperial troops died in an instant. The explosion was so large it registered on our orbital sensors. Several council members made sounds of disbelief. High Chancellor Mordrex remained silent, but his crystalline body had stopped pulsing. He was completely focused on Kriath's testimony. The humans rebuilt the wall using rubble from the explosion. They filled the gaps with the bodies of their own dead and mixed concrete. It took us 4 more days to breach that section again. When we finally got through, we found that the humans had evacuated that entire sector. They had fallen back to a new defensive line. We had paid a terrible price for empty buildings. Ambassador Chen was crying openly now. Kriath felt something he rarely experienced. Shame. He was describing the destruction of her people, and she had to sit and listen. This became the pattern of the siege. The humans would defend a position until it became untenable. They would inflict maximum casualties. Then they would retreat to a new defensive line, destroying everything behind them so we could not use it. They burned their own hospitals. They collapsed their own tunnels. They poisoned their own water supplies. Kriath changed the holographic display again. Now it showed a timeline with casualty figures. By day 20, we had lost 15,000 soldiers. The humans had lost approximately 200,000 fighters and civilians, but they showed no signs of surrender. Instead, they became more creative in their resistance. They used biological weapons from their old medical research facilities. They released diseases that affected my soldiers but not humans. 3,000 of my troops died from a plague that the humans had been studying before we arrived. Council member Thexnar spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. This is horrifying. These humans sound like monsters. No, Krieth said firmly. They were not monsters. They were desperate. They were fighting for their world against an empire that spanned the galaxy. They used every weapon they had because they believed they had no other choice. The holographic display showed the final days of the siege. On day 40, we breached the final defensive line. We were 1 kilometer from the central government building. The humans had nowhere left to retreat. We had them surrounded with overwhelming force. I personally contacted the human commander and offered surrender terms one last time. I promised that if they stopped fighting, we would provide medical care for their wounded and protection for their civilians. Krieth paused. His hands were shaking now. The human commander's name was General Sarah Okonkwo. She was 63 years old. She had been a soldier for 40 years. When I spoke to her over our communication link, she was covered in blood and dust. Half her face was burned from an explosion. She could barely stand. And do you know what she said to me? The council waited. She said, "We will not surrender. Come and take what you think you have won." Then she cut the communication. The holographic display showed the final assault. Krieth felt sick watching it, even though he had seen it 1,000 times in his memories. The last 7 days were hell. The humans fought for every building, every room, every hallway. They had run out of ammunition for their weapons, so they used knives and pieces of metal. They had run out of explosives, so they dropped rubble from high buildings onto my soldiers. They had no food or water left, but they continued fighting. Krieth's voice broke slightly. On the last day, I led the final assault personally. I wanted to end it. I wanted to stop the dying. We fought our way into the government building floor by floor. The humans had barricaded themselves on the top floors. When we reached them, there were 300 soldiers left. They were so weak from hunger they could barely lift their weapons. But they formed a line and prepared to fight to the last person. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the environmental system seemed to have stopped. I walked forward alone. I ordered my soldiers to hold their fire. I approached General Okonkwo and I told her it was over. I told her that her people had fought with honor. I told her that I would accept surrender and spare the remaining soldiers and civilians. She looked at me with those human eyes and I saw no defeat there, only exhaustion. Krieth met Ambassador Chen Wei's eyes. She said, "We surrender this city, but Earth will never be yours. You have taken our home, but you have created something you cannot control. Every human child will learn about Geneva. Every human will remember the price you paid. You won this battle, General, but you will never win this war." Then she dropped her weapon and ordered her soldiers to surrender. Krieth turned back to the council. After the siege ended, I reviewed the casualty figures. We had lost 40,000 soldiers taking Geneva. The humans had lost 500,000 fighters and 2 million civilians. The city was completely destroyed. Nothing remained but ruins. And yet I felt like I had lost. I felt like the humans had achieved something we had not. High Chancellor Mordrex finally spoke. "What do you mean?" "You won the siege. You conquered Earth." "No, High Chancellor," Krieth said quietly. "The humans let us stop killing them. They calculated the cost and decided that survival was more important than victory. But they made sure we would never forget what it cost to defeat them. Every Imperial soldier who fought on Earth has nightmares. Every one of us remembers, and that was their weapon, memory." Krieth stood before the War Council and prepared to deliver the most important part of his testimony. He had told them about the past. Now he needed to make them understand the present and fear the future. After Geneva fell, the remaining human governments surrendered within days, Krieth said. They had seen what we would do. They had seen the price of resistance. But I want to explain why they really surrendered, because it was not because we broke their will to fight. The holographic display changed. Now it showed a series of mathematical equations and strategic analyses. The human governments performed a calculation. They assessed their losses against our losses. They determined that we had lost 40,000 soldiers out of a fleet garrison of 500,000. That is an 8% casualty rate. Then they analyzed how many soldiers we would lose if they continued fighting across the entire planet. Their mathematicians estimated that conquering all of Earth would cost us between 200,000 and 300,000 Imperial troops. Council member Voltas interrupted. That is still a victory for the Empire. We have billions of soldiers. Yes, Krieth agreed. But the humans realized something. They realized that those casualty numbers made Earth economically disadvantageous to hold. It would cost more to garrison and control their planet than they could ever produce in resources or tribute. So they surrendered on their terms. They offered to join the Empire peacefully, pay tribute, and follow imperial law. In exchange, we would not destroy their civilization completely. Krieth paused and looked around the chamber. The humans surrendered to save their species, but they made sure the price of taking their world would be remembered. They made sure that every Imperial commander would think twice before invading another planet. They turned their defeat into a weapon. High Chancellor Mordrex leaned forward. This was 30 years ago, General. The humans have been model Imperial citizens since then. They pay their tribute on time. They follow our laws. They have caused no trouble. Why should we fear conscripting them now? This was the moment Krieth had been preparing for. He had maintained intelligence networks on Earth for 30 years. He had watched the humans carefully. He knew what they were doing. High Chancellor, with your permission, I would like to present classified intelligence gathered from Earth over the past 3 decades. Mordrex gestured for him to continue. The holographic display changed to show population graphs, industrial output charts, and educational statistics. Krieth highlighted specific numbers. When we conquered Earth, their population was 7 billion. Current population is 11 billion. They have recovered from the war and exceeded their pre-war numbers in just 30 years. This is unusual. Most conquered species take a century or more to recover from annexation warfare. He changed the display. Human industrial capacity was measured at 100 arbitrary units when we first arrived. Current capacity is 300 units. They have tripled their industrial output while paying imperial tribute. They have built new factories, new shipyards, new research facilities. All of this is legal under imperial law, but the scale and speed of their recovery is remarkable. Council member Thexnar spoke up. Perhaps they are simply industrious. This does not indicate a threat. Let me show you more, Krieth said. He changed the display to show military academies and training facilities. Every human nation now requires 2 years of military service for all citizens. This is allowed under imperial law for maintaining internal security. But look at what they teach in these programs. The display showed curriculum documents that Krieth's agents had obtained. Every human soldier studies the annexation wars as required curriculum. They learn in detail how small forces fought against overwhelming imperial power. They study the tactics used in the Ural Mountains. They analyze the siege of Geneva. They learn guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, and resistance strategies. The humans are teaching an entire generation how to fight the Empire. The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Several members shouted that this should not be allowed. Others demanded immediate investigations. Krieth waited for the noise to die down. There is more. Human cultural exports have spread throughout imperial space. Their entertainment, their music, their art, their literature. It has become popular among younger generations of multiple species, and embedded in this culture are ideas that are dangerous to imperial stability. Krieth showed examples on the holographic display. Human movies, books, and music filled the space. Humans tell stories about rebellion against tyranny. They celebrate individual rights and freedoms. They promote the idea that people should choose their own governments. These concepts are spreading through the Empire like a virus. Young people from dozens of species are consuming human culture and absorbing human values. Ambassador Chen had stopped crying. Now she watched Krieth with an expression he could not read. Was it fear? Pride? Something else? I have identified 73 separate resistance movements across imperial space that cite human culture as an inspiration. None of these movements are controlled by Earth. The humans are not directly fomenting rebellion, but their ideas are spreading on their own, carried by those who find them appealing. High Chancellor Mordrex's crystalline body began pulsing again, faster now. Krieth could tell the High Chancellor was angry. Are you suggesting that we should fear human ideas, General? Ideas are not weapons. With respect, High Chancellor, ideas are the most powerful weapons. Humans have a saying. They say that you can kill a man, but you cannot kill an idea. Their History is filled with examples of ideas that changed their world. Democracy, human rights, freedom of speech. These ideas spread and overthrew governments. They started wars. They reshaped civilizations. Kreath changed the display one final time. Now it showed a strategic analysis he had been preparing for years. Now consider what will happen if we conscript 5 million human soldiers. We will take them from Earth and deploy them across Imperial space. We will train them in advanced Imperial warfare. We will give them access to our latest weapons and technology. We will integrate them into units with soldiers from other species. And all of this will be under the cover of loyal service to the Empire. He let that sink in for a moment. These 5 million humans will be perfectly positioned to gather intelligence on Imperial military capabilities. They will learn our tactics, our weaknesses, and our standard operating procedures. They will make contacts with soldiers from dozens of other species. They will spread their culture and their ideas to every corner of Imperial space. And they will do all of this with perfect legitimacy because they are serving as we commanded. Council member Voltha stood up from his seat. You are being paranoid, General. You see threats that do not exist. The humans are broken. They know they cannot defeat the Empire. The humans are not broken, Kreath said quietly. They are waiting. And we are about to give them exactly what they need to prepare for a war they have been planning for 30 years. The council chamber erupted in arguments. Some members agreed with Kreath. Others called him a coward. Several demanded that he be arrested for defeatism. High Chancellor Mordrex watched it all with his crystalline face showing no expression. Finally, Mordrex raised one hand and the chamber fell silent. General Kreath, you have made serious accusations. You suggest that conscripting humans will somehow endanger the Empire, but the Empire has survived for 10,000 years. We have conquered 1,000 worlds. We are fighting a war that threatens our existence, and we need every soldier we can get. Why should 5 million primitive humans concern us? Kreath met the High Chancellor's gaze directly. Because, High Chancellor, humans are a death-ground species. They are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. For 30 years, they have been recovering and preparing. If we force them into this war, we will not be conscripting soldiers. We will be weaponizing a species that knows how to turn any situation to their advantage. We will be creating the conditions for the very rebellion we should fear. He paused. I fought the humans once. I won that war, but it cost me 40,000 soldiers and 30 years of nightmares. I do not want to fight them again, and neither should you. The War Council chamber descended into chaos. Council members argued with each other in dozens of languages. Some demanded that humans be conscripted immediately to show Imperial strength. Others called for investigations into Earth's military training programs. A few sat in silence, clearly troubled by Kreath's testimony. High Chancellor Mordrex finally restored order by dimming the chamber lights. When everyone quieted down, he spoke. We will debate this matter and then vote. Council member Thexnar, you may speak first. The floating jellyfish-like creature pulsed with agitation. I believe General Kreath is suffering from trauma. He experienced difficult combat on Earth and it has colored his judgment. The humans are primitive. Yes, they fought hard during annexation, but that was 30 years ago. They have been peaceful Imperial citizens since then. We need soldiers for the war. 5 million humans will help our cause. I vote to conscript them. Several council members voiced agreement. Kreath felt his heart sink. Council member Volta spoke next. I respect General Kreath's service, but I must disagree with his assessment. Every species resists initially. Every species eventually accepts Imperial rule. The humans are no different. They have no fleet, no orbital defenses, and no ability to threaten us. I vote to conscript them. More voices of agreement. Kreath counted the votes in his head. It was not looking good, but then Council member Cyralek spoke. She was an ancient being whose species had been part of the Empire for 8,000 years. Her wisdom was respected throughout the galaxy. I have reviewed the casualty reports from the human annexation. I have studied the tactics they used. General Kreath is correct about one thing. Humans fight differently than other species. They have a concept they call going down swinging. When most species face certain death, they surrender to preserve life. Humans often choose to fight harder when death is certain. This is not rational by our standards, but it is effective. The chamber grew quieter as Cyrilex continued. However, I am less concerned about human combat abilities than I am about their cultural influence. General Kriath showed us evidence that human ideas are spreading. Ideas about individual rights, about choosing governments, about resisting tyranny. These ideas are dangerous to Imperial stability. If we conscript humans and spread them across Imperial space, we will be spreading these ideas even further. I vote against conscription. Now the vote was less certain. Other council members began speaking, some for and some against. The debate went on for hours. Kriath stood on the central platform, exhausted, listening to his fate and humanity's fate being decided. Finally, Ambassador Chen was given permission to speak. She stood slowly from her seat and walked to the speaker's position. Her face was composed now, though her eyes were still red from crying. "Honored council members," she said in perfect Imperial Standard language, "I am Ambassador Chen, representative of humanity to the Galactic Empire. I was born 5 years after the annexation wars ended. I grew up in the ruins of what used to be Paris. I lost my grandparents in the siege of Geneva. I know the cost of war between our peoples." Her voice was soft but steady. Every being in the chamber listened. Humanity does not want war with the Empire. We have seen what that war costs. We have paid that price in blood and ruins. We joined the Empire because we had no choice, yes, but also because we hoped that peace was possible. We have been loyal citizens for 30 years. We pay our tribute. We follow your laws. We ask only to be left to rebuild our world and raise our children in peace. She paused and looked at Kriath. General Kriath is correct about some things. We do teach our history. We do remember Geneva and the Urals and all the places where humans died fighting. We remember because forgetting would dishonor those who sacrificed everything. But remembering does not mean we want to repeat those events. We remember so that we never have to fight that way again. Ambassador Chen turned to face High Chancellor Mordrex directly. I ask the Council to grant our request for exemption, not because we are weak, but because conscripting us will create the very problem you fear. Humans who are forced to fight become dangerous. Humans who choose to fight for a cause they believe in are unstoppable. Do not force us to become your enemies. Let us remain neutral. Let us remain at peace. The chamber was silent when she finished. Ambassador Chen returned to her seat and sat down, her hands folded in her lap once more. High Chancellor Mordrex stood. His crystalline body reflected light throughout the chamber. We will now vote. All in favor of granting humanity's request for exemption from Imperial Decree 7743. Kriath watched as council members indicated their votes. He counted each one. 6 votes in favor of exemption, all opposed. 7 votes against. The decree would stand. Humanity would be conscripted. Mordrex's voice echoed through the chamber. The vote is 7-6. Humanity's request for exemption is denied. 5 million human soldiers will be conscripted within 6 months and deployed to war zones as needed. The High Chancellor turned to Kriath. General, you have served the Empire with distinction for 2 centuries, but your testimony today shows that you have lost your faith in Imperial strength. You have spread defeatist ideas in this chamber. Therefore, you are hereby stripped of your rank and exiled to Outpost Station Gamma 7 on the frontier. You will serve as a military advisor there until such time as you recover your loyalty to the Empire. Kriath bowed his head. He had expected this. Speaking against the Empire always had consequences. I accept your judgment, High Chancellor. As guards escorted Kriath from the chamber, he passed Ambassador Chen. She looked up at him and he saw something in her eyes. Not anger, not fear. Something else. Determination? Satisfaction? He could not tell. 3 days later, Kriath arrived at Outpost Station Gamma 7. It was a remote station on the edge of Imperial space, far from the war and far from Earth. He would spend the rest of his years here. Forgotten, but Kriath maintained his intelligence networks. He still received reports from across the Empire. And 6 months after the vote, he learned that human troops had begun deploying to war zones. The reports were interesting. A human regiment fought alongside Imperial forces against the Confederation on the planet Vexar 4. The humans displayed exceptional tactical creativity. They also shared these tactics with the non-human troops in their unit. Several allied species began adopting human fighting methods. A human battalion was stationed on a supply depot world. Within 3 weeks, the human soldiers had befriended local workers from a dozen different species. They shared human music and food. They taught card games and told stories. The depot commander reported increased morale, but also noted that the humans asked many questions about Imperial logistics systems. Human soldiers deployed to the front lines sent messages back to Earth regularly. Imperial sensors reviewed these messages for security violations. They found nothing suspicious. Just humans writing to their families about their experiences, about the species they met, about the places they saw. But Kriath noticed patterns in the reports. Human troops were spreading across Imperial space exactly as he had predicted. They were gathering information. They were making contacts. They were learning. And then the really interesting reports started coming in. A human medical officer was captured by Confederation forces. According to intelligence reports, she was treated well and exchanged with other prisoners after 2 weeks. But during those 2 weeks, she had extensive conversations with Confederation soldiers. She shared information about human culture and history. The Confederation soldiers apparently found human stories about rebelling against empires very interesting. A human engineering unit was assigned to repair damaged Imperial warships. They completed their work efficiently and effectively, but they also had access to the ship's computer systems. They could see how Imperial technology worked. They could study Imperial ship designs, all perfectly legal under their orders. More reports followed. Human soldiers performing their duties correctly, but also doing something else, something subtle. They were building a network across the entire Imperial military. They were spreading ideas. They were preparing. Kriath sat in his small quarters on Outpost Station Gamma 7 and read these reports with a feeling of grim inevitability. The Empire had made exactly the mistake he had warned them about. Then 2 years after the conscription began, Kriath received a priority intelligence report. It was marked with the highest security classification. He should not have been able to access it from his exile station, but his old intelligence contacts still fed him information. The report detailed a series of minor rebellions that had broken out on 3 different worlds. The rebellions were quickly suppressed, but investigators found something interesting. The rebel groups had all received tactical advice from human soldiers who had been stationed on those worlds. The humans claimed they had just been sharing general military knowledge with local friends. Nothing illegal, nothing provable, but the pattern was there. Kriath allowed himself a bitter laugh. The humans were not just gathering intelligence. They were planting seeds. Every human soldier was a potential agent of change. Every conversation was a chance to spread ideas. Every friendship was a future alliance. He remembered General Sarah Okonkwo's last words to him in Geneva.